we'll do the live thing first. Like, hey everybody, welcome back to the Bigmark podcast. It's me, your host, Bigmark. If it's your first time listening, welcome. If it's not, welcome back. Like I always like to say, if it's your first time listening, please rate and subscribe. If whatever, I think on Spotify, they're doing ratings now. So on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to the podcast, rate it. And if you're watching the podcast on YouTube, hit that bell. Make sure you get the notifications when we drop a new video. Always give a little thumbs up there for the videos. I love everyone who likes the videos, and obviously everyone who watches, and then subscribe to our channel and follow along. Like I said, you can either listen or watch the podcast. More or less, it's really interesting as the episodes go by. We're on fucking episode 62 now already. Holy shit. It's really fun to kind of see how people are, some people are watching the podcast a little bit more, some people are listening. So anyway, if you ever wanted to reach out and let us know any topics or comments or questions or anything, please reach out either on Instagram or our Twitter. You can DM us there at the Bigmark podcast and at the Bigmark pod. And if you'd like to support the podcast, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. Different tiers there and stuff, and just if you want to shoot us a couple bones and help support and make sure we have all the nice equipment and all this stuff, everything's been we're always trying to upgrade things and make the podcast better for you guys, so every little bit helps. But again, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for clicking on the video or the link, however you saw it. Today, actually, last podcast, I was talking to my good buddy Darren Brooks. Shout out Darren Brooks. And then I was actually on a phone call with my family overseas, well, across the nation, really. But my parents in Germany, hey, Pops and Andrea, and my aunt and uncle in San Francisco, and my cousin in Los Angeles. So shout out everybody over there. Shout out Malinkoviches. And we kind of got into talking again about David Goggins, like I was talking about with Darren Brooks a lot, and I kind of knew I was going to do a podcast on him because I just actually listened to his audiobook, Can't Hurt Me, which I guess it's like in the kind of self-help section, but really, really good book. Honestly, if you ever wanted any type of motivation, listen to this book. Like we mentioned, Darren Brooks listens to this book once a year to kind of get things going. So it's like I said, very motivating and a very interesting story into, I guess, the kind of limits of the human body and what you can kind of do when you train your mind to be resilient and endure certain challenges and sufferings and things like that in life. I didn't want to get super caught up in who David Goggins is and all about the book and all that stuff, because really the most important thing about this whole thing is kind of the concepts that David Goggins kind of brings to the table. He's a fascinating character himself, obviously wrought with his own flaws and his own kind of characteristics, but again, I kind of want to speak maybe more towards that kind of the message, so to speak, that's being sent just by his being, because there's certain people out in the world, in the universe, if you want to say it, but there's people in the world and in our culture that have to push the extreme, and I think we need those people. We need those people to push it to the max and really go to the edges of what we think humans are capable of doing. And I think that's why we admire and put certain athletes on pedestal, and extreme athletes and people who bungee jump and jump off planes and all this stuff, because those activities are starting to get close to the edge of human capability. And we need these people to exist to kind of show everyone at least where those boundaries are. In fact, Jim Morrison was a good example in kind of like the drug aspect. So his whole idea was just go to excess and everything. And I forget who said. Anyway, excess leads to the path of wisdom. I'm just going to check this out here. I want to see who said that, because the road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom. William Blake, classic. The road of excess leads to the path of wisdom. You never know what is enough until you know what is more than enough. I guess Jim Morrison basically lived by that credo. But again, that's the thing where, and we'll get into a little bit more into some of David Goggins' kind of ideas that come from the book. But that whole idea of that excess, extreme, pushing the envelope, just going to that very edge of existence and capability, really gives everyone else this kind of idea of what is possible. Maybe that's not necessarily something that everyone's going to go do and be extreme, but it's a testament and it's an example. It's the ultimate leading by example, pushing as hard as you can and showing what you're capable of, because it's at least probably going to inspire someone to kind of push it a little bit further, right? I don't know if everyone's going to be, the next David Goggins and go run 100 miles, but you never know. Who knows, right? And it's funny. I wanted to do a podcast on David Goggins too, because I heard about him on a podcast too. I heard about him on Joe Rogan's podcast. Obviously, he's in a lot of hot water right now. Be that as it may, as I've always said, I've never really watched the podcast for Joe Rogan. I watched the podcast for his guests, but whatever's happening there is whatever. But the first time I ever saw David Goggins was on Joe Rogan, and he tells a really good story. So if you ever wanted to hear a good synopsis of him, and he hasn't been on too many podcasts, to be truthfully honest, he's a really, really interesting character, very stoic, and kind of the epitome of like the ultimate warrior soldier kind of character. So in my research, they categorized David Goggins as an American ultra runner. So David Goggins, an American ultra runner, also a retired Navy SEAL and former U.S. Air Force Tactical Air Control Party member, served in the Iraq War, released his memoir Can't Hurt Me in 2018. That's what I'll kind of go into a little bit more today. Honestly, really good, just as an aside here, really good audiobook. Interesting format. I was talking to Darren about this, but it's the first audiobook in that format to kind of be an audiobook, obviously, as we all know, someone reading the book and we're just listening to it. It was half that and then half kind of like a podcast interview thing. So David Goggins and Adam Skolnick, who was I believe the ghostwriter of Can't Hurt Me, and he also read the book. Him and David would sit down after each chapter of the book and kind of go through everything, and really interesting, like lots of knowledge, lots more, like I believe way more insight than what is necessarily in the novel, like in paper. So it's really cool. Like it's a very good listen. It's pretty succinct. It's not too long of a read compared to some fucking audiobooks I've listened to. But anyway, I digress. Back to David. So he was born on February 17th, 1975. By the time this podcast is released, it's going to be David Goggins' birthday. So happy birthday, David Goggins. Shout out. I know you're listening while you're running 1,000 miles. He was raised in Williamsville, New York. So it's like Buffalo, kind of Niagara Falls region, with his parents and brother. And they all worked at the whole family worked together at his father's skating rink. really, really interesting. I mean, tough town, Buffalo-ish area, growing up there, working, being a young kid, working with a family and working late nights in the skating rink and having to clean up and doing all that craziness, is tough enough. But Goggins and his family actually suffered constant abuse from his father, physical, mental. He used to get beat. It was kind of like, in the book, it seems like David's father was kind of like, it was like a keeping up with the Joneses scenario kind of thing. He was always comparing their family to other people, and it's always tough when you're kind of like the only thing you're really pushing in life is just to kind of be successful so that other people can like you. Because it was kind of like he had to smile and wave to the neighbors as they're going up to the door, and as soon as the door shut, that just melted off his face, and he was a drinker. And the story goes into it really, really in depth, and it's really horrific, all this other stuff that David experiences as a young kid, and having to kind of hide bruises and stuff at school, and just all that horrible stuff. And again, both the whole family was being abused, including the mom. And at one point, she kind of snapped, and they decided to escape. David, his brother, and the mother decided to escape one night and take off and just never look back. And they did, and they ended up moving to Indiana. And David always struggled in school, obviously with the trauma and stress that he was dealing with at home. It's really tough to kind of focus as a kid. It's interesting, I think I read this in a Malcolm Gladwell book. But essentially, no one is ever bad at math. It's just, when people say, oh, I suck at math, or they're not good, or they failed eventually. Essentially, somewhere along the way, you missed a crucial step, a crucial lesson, and then for some reason, you were just able to kind of get by on that kind of rickety structure and build everything on top. But that structure and the footing, that weak foundation that you built it on, is bound to crumble. And essentially, that's how David was with like more or less everything, because he kind of had to just put the pieces together, and he was always up late and sleeping at school, and like couldn't stay awake. He kind of basically learned to cheat. So he just could like figure out a way to cheat off people's papers, and it got him through high school. Obviously, that's an issue. It's that same concept with the math idea that, he's gotten to a place where people kind of assume he has all this knowledge, and obviously he just kind of cheated his way there. So obviously not in like the traditional book learning sense, unless he can cheat off someone, he's not going to really do well in any kind of standardized test. So at age 18, after high school, Goggins decided to join the Air Force. And because of that kind of cheating thing, when he went to take the ASVAB, the Army aptitude test, more or less, ASVAB is the acronym, he actually ended up failing that test twice, because they set it up like each person has a different test. So the people beside you can't cheat. So he had to bust his ass. He had to really, really learn and really study. And that was kind of like some of the first, because basically David Goggins talks a lot about like mental toughness. And that was kind of some of the first real like forays, at least for him, about really pushing his mind and really getting into that whole idea of what your mind can do when you push it, because he did eventually pass it, of course. And during his Air Force training, he was actually diagnosed with the sickle cell trait. So sickle cell anemia, type of anemia where your blood cells are shaped like little crescent moons kind of thing. and they can like plug up and cause blood clots. Essentially, he was diagnosed with that and was removed from training because of that, so that he was discharged because of a medical leave. And David, excuse me. David has a really interesting take on that, where it was kind of one of his first, forays into looking into who he really was and accepting that. And that's one of his big tips is, people like to triple down on their strengths, but sometimes you got to kind of triple down on your weaknesses, and you really got to lean into them and understand, and that's what's interesting about Can't Help Me. What's interesting about the book Can't Hurt Me in the self-help realm is it's not really just focusing on your positive aspects and strengths and pushing them as hard as you can. So it's like when you're tripling down on your weaknesses, so to speak, it's really leaning into it's understanding your shadow if you're looking in a Jungian fashion. But it's really David's whole approach is knowing your weaknesses and then creating contingencies and creating plans that will when you do inevitably run into those weaknesses, you're ready to face them. Anyway, that was David's kind of foray there into understanding that he has that kind of weakness in himself that if there's an easy way out, he's going to take it. This is obviously at the time he's worked through that, and I doubt that he ever acts in this certain way. He probably sees those easy ways out, but he never actually takes it. Anyway, so after leaving so he actually got back. Like I said, he after he was released on the medical leave, he actually did go back, and he was in the U.S. Air Force from 94 to 99. He was doing a lot of recruiting, stuff like that, because of his health issues. So anyway, after he actually left the Army, he wasn't in the greatest shape leaving the Air Force anyway. The Air Force. And then he became an exterminator. He started just eating late, eating shitty, not thinking about it, not caring, getting really heavy. I think he was over 300 pounds and he's like 6'1". So, he was pushing some good weight. He always stayed in the gym, he said, and worked out and would do weights, but never ran, never did any kind of actual cardio stuff. And then one day he was actually watching a documentary on the Navy SEALs, and he decided to become a Navy SEAL. He spent 2 months training hard as he fucking could for the physical and mental, obviously rigors of BUD/S training. He lost 106 pounds in 2 months. And after 3 attempts of BUD/S and 2 hell weeks, which is the worst basic training you can possibly think of. They break you down, they put you in water, they put you in cold, they basically try to drown you, just to be prepared. And after his 3rd attempt, he passed BUD/S, and he became the 36th African American to become a SEAL, and that was in 2001. So obviously not a rich history in the Navy SEALs of African Americans. It's really tough to get in. It's really tough to get into no matter what. But obviously David pushed himself, and there's moments in the book. Again, I don't have all the time in the world on these podcasts, but there's stories in this book that you have to listen to, that I won't go into now. But just how he got through it, and that callousing of the mind, and just pushing through and repetition and going after it, and just looking in the face. And he talks about all kinds of different concepts in the book, but you can really see how his process got there. I'm not going to say everyone's going to go through basic training just to feel a little bit motivated in daily life, but it helps you understand how he gets to this, how, it's not just like you're just listening to him say, get up and do your thing and like stay hard and do all this crazy shit. You're like, oh man, you really pushed yourself. You lived all this shit. You're actually like coming from a place where you really understand struggle. So anyway, I digress. So that was back in 2001. So his military career, I guess, started in 94. So over 20 years, Goggins served his 20-year military career. Goggins served in Iraq and Afghanistan. In 2004, Goggins actually graduated Army Ranger School, which is one of the hardest tests you can do, one of the hardest training regimens, blah blah blah. It's usually like a demotion for Navy SEALs, but Goggins went and did it just because it's hard. And after several of his friends died in Afghanistan in a helicopter crash in 2005 during Operation Red Wings, which is also the story that the movie Lone Survivor is based on, Goggins began long distance running to raise money for special operations, for the Special Operations Warrior Foundation, which is a foundation that gives college scholarships and grants to children of fallen special ops soldiers. So really great foundation, obviously. And so he wanted to compete in Badwater, which is a 135 mile or 217 kilometer ultra marathon. Obviously, ultra marathon being more than a marathon. What's the actual definition? Maybe I should look it up. Shoot. So, an ultra marathon, also called ultra distance or ultra running, is any foot race longer than the traditional marathon. A length of 42.195 kilometers, or 26 miles, 385 yards. So, like I said, yeah, it just has to be longer than that. But anyway, most ultra marathoners are looking at, I think it's like 60. I know D. Brooks ran a 60 some kilometer ultra. And anyway, 217 kilometers. Holy shit. So it's considered the hardest race in the world. It's ran in Death Valley in California. So it's basically ran like where you're just going to get cooked. So anyway, over the years, he actually ended up running Badwater 3 times, and he raised $2 million for the foundation. And he also set a world record for pull-ups. He did 4,030 pull-ups, I guess, within 24 hours or whatever. And he held that record for 2014. So, this is what kind of got him into stuff. I always wondered, what really got him into pushing himself. And it was charity. It was to raise money, which is really great. To kind of backtrack a little bit to actually, Badwater, even though David did it 3 times, you actually have to get invited to Badwater. And this is one of the craziest stories that I had to say from the book. And so to get invited to Badwater, Goggins actually had to run another ultra marathon first. So the guy who was organizing Badwater, I guess, was a little bit of a dick to David. Excuse me. Probably for good reason, just because you don't just want to let anybody come into an ultra marathon, especially if they haven't fucking run an ultra marathon. So at this point, David hadn't run an ultra marathon. He's trying to go to Badwater. And I think as an organizer, you got to be strict on those, because you don't want anyone obviously dying and just like, oh yeah, come on and run it. Anyway, so to get invited, Goggins had to run a bloody ultra marathon. So he entered the San Diego 1-day ultra, which is 101 miles, And after he had spoke with the organizer from Badwater, the next that year's San Diego One Day was in 3 days from that call. So he fucking just did it on 3 days' notice. He ran 101 miles in 19 hours and 6 minutes, which is pretty much like solid pace. I mean, let's see here. That's that's like, I don't know how to do running math. Anyway, that's a good fucking pace. My bad. At the time, he was 240 pounds when he ran it. His kidneys failed at about the 70-mile mark. He broke all the small bones in his feet, and he had dual stress fractures in both his lower legs. So, yeah. Needless to say, probably a good idea to train a little bit. If anyone's listening and wants to run a fucking ultramarathon after listening to this podcast, do not listen and do not do what David Goggins did here. Please train. David obviously refers to this as his worst pain in his life. And there's obviously a lot of other times a lot of other stories I probably could have mentioned to bring up this whole next idea, but I wanted to talk about that San Diego One Day that he did, because there's probably no one else in the world that ran an ultramarathon on 3 fucking days' notice. So, God bless the guy. But it's a really interesting concept, because he put, like, when you listen to the story, when you listen to him tell it, and when he recounts it in the story or on any podcast you listen to, he talks about, again, it being the worst pain in his life, but he pushed past that struggle. He just kept pushing and kept going past it and kept going past it. And Duncan Trussell, who's another great comedian, just podcaster, just amazing dude out there, and his friends believe that David's enlightened. So the Buddha says life is suffering, and we must contend with many forms of suffering. And that whole concept is, basically what David does. He searches for challenges. He searches for, as much as nature looks for the path of least resistance, he searches for the hard, the difficult. And in that suffering, there potentially can be enlightenment. There can be some type of experience that transcends the self. And, David talks about forgetting the self in a way where you're that self saying, you're not going to make it, you're sore, you're tired, you're broken, your body can't keep going. David's somehow able to drown that out, not listen to it, go past it. And in the story, sometimes that backfires, but it just allows him to do kind of superhuman things. And it's really interesting. That potentially that is a form of enlightenment, again, through suffering, potentially. Another really interesting concept from the book is the 40% rule. And David's idea around the 40% rule is that we tend to give up around 40%. Essentially, when we still have 60% more to give, and David fully admits too, even he himself has rarely given 100%, because maybe even given 100 in his mind would be potentially going till you're like completely dead of exhaustion. But that 40% rule, that at 40% is when most people give up. So if you can just give 41%. Or 45 or 50%, imagine how many times, how much more you can achieve and how much further you can go, because you've just given that extra couple percent. Even though you think you've given it your all, you probably still have so much room in the tank. And that again, that comes from practice. You have to kind of put yourself in exhausting situations, and you look at your crazy Joe Rogans, you look at your David Goggins, you look at your crazy people that are out there that push themselves to, you call them crazy, but people who are on the fringe and who are pushing themselves to the absolute limit. They're able to kind of conquer those inner feelings because your any challenge you're now seeing in life is going to be easier than what you did when you were training. It's just like it's like what David talks about in training in the military. You don't train to get killed, you train to kill. You don't train to be killed. You go out there and you get after it, and you go past what possibly could ever happen in a natural situation, so that if it ever somehow even came close to that, you've trained past that scenario. Anyway, it's like football, where practice was so much harder than the games. In fact, the games tended to be easy because we trained so hard, but that's why you train hard, is to make the games easy. Goggins also talks about failure is one of the biggest gifts of all, that in his life, failing buds and not getting passed into Ranger School, or in his first few times with his health issues, not getting into the Air Force and doing all these things, it really revealed to him, what you're able to do in the face of failure if you don't give up. Classic self-help story, right? And obviously, one of David's biggest things, kind of as a closing thought, is you'll find peace when you're constantly challenging yourself. When you're constantly finding ways to do things. Again, nature's biggest way is finding the path of least resistance and doing things the most efficient way. But if we can find a way to challenge yourself and push, David talks about meeting God after he's dead, and God has this list of things that he could have done, and David doesn't want that list to be very long. So what do you want on that list, right? What do you want to leave on the table? Hopefully nothing, right? So what think about what you want to do. Challenge yourself, keep pushing, repetition, discipline, and just continue to do it. And doesn't necessarily mean uprooting your life and starting with a blank slate. It's that 40% rule. 1 more percent, just give a little bit more in what you're doing, or do that thing that you love a little bit longer, or add that 1 more minute to the day, because I guess if you get up early enough, there's a lot of time in the day, but still, you want to just put that little effort in to start. Don't just think that you're going to get somewhere immediately, but when you start, keep adding, keep building, and never stop building. That you'll never plateau. You keep fighting through things, and you'll be amazed at where you get. And that repetition will continue to callous the mind, right? It's just like when you're lifting weights, right? It's how do you get calluses on your fingers? Is from continuously lifting the weight, right? So get out there. If there's some kind of thing that you need motivation from, go listen to this book, go read this book. It's amazing. David Goggins is an amazing man. Go check out his Instagram. He doesn't post all the time, but when he does post, it's some amazing thing that just makes you want to go run up a mountain. And yeah, it's fun to even talk about, because again, he's just such an amazing character, an amazing figure that lives in the extreme and really is that example of what humans can be. So thank you so much for listening. Go out there, go for a run, but check us out on Instagram, check us out on Twitter. If you have any comments or questions, hit us up. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that bell, make sure, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the podcast. If you want to support the podcast, go check out our Patreon, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. And yeah, let us know what you think. We always want to hear from you. I love you all. Stay hard, motherfuckers. Peace.